Wang was running at full speed, bumping into one person after another despite the pain. Wang knew this was still better than being shot at repeatedly by the army. The Tiananmen Square he usually went to every morning had now been transformed into a fiery hell engulfed by the deafening roar of gunfire and tanks. A single small mistake could cost the king his life in this. Suddenly, a bullet lodged itself straight in his body. The king fell, his robe stained red with blood. Wang and 39's mind went blank and his eyes grew. A man was approaching him. We had the Beijing gun. After years of being consumed by the so-called continuous revolution, Mao Zedong finally found peace. He lay neatly in a glass coffin surrounded by mourners and the dog-like leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. However, Mao had no idea that his death marked the beginning of a new era, one that was in some ways no less chaotic than the Cultural Revolution. The Gang of Four loyal soldiers who adhered strictly to Mao and 39's ideology were officially arrested in October 6. They opposed all forms of economic reform and opening up, therefore eliminating them is of paramount importance for China and 39's rapid development, and also to pave the way for the reformist faction within the Communist Party led by this man. The esteemed Xiaoping, once abandoned by Mao, has not returned to the political arena. Hua Guofeng, the designated successor to Mao, reluctantly brought Deng back after being pressured by veteran officials. But deep down, Hua remained somewhat loyal to Mao and tried to prevent his return to power. On the other hand, the veteran officials had all been purged by Mao and the Gang of Four. Therefore, they wanted to leverage the party and 39's political resources to turn the situation around, and the party actually did just that. He quickly gained support within the Communist Party by cultivating his broad network of allies. Just 1 year after his return to politics, Deng delivered a key speech at the third plenary session of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. Even though Ha remained in power, this event solidified Deng and 39's supreme leadership position, as he clearly presented his vision for economic and ideological reforms. 2 years later, Deng also succeeded in removing Hua from the position of General Secretary, the highest leader in the Chinese Communist Party. Ho was later appointed vice chairman of the party, but was forced to resign in 1982. But the party is not filling this void on its own. He appointed several allies to leadership positions in the party, notably Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang, who was promoted to general secretary, while Zhao retained the position of premier of the State Council. By law, they are the most powerful leaders in China, but the rule of law did in 39 seem to really work. Under Deng Xiaoping, Ho and Triu held the highest positions, but they were merely tools to execute the orders and policies of a more powerful figure. And that was Deng Xiaoping. How could Deng impose his will on the party and the country when he wasn't in 39 even sitting in the seat of ultimate power? Remember that Deng led the reformist faction, purged the conservative faction, and appointed Hu along with Zhao. This means that, to some extent, he single-handedly paved the way for his cronies to rise to the pinnacle of power. No wonder everyone listens to him. In addition, to ensure that no one could defy the orders of the person holding the position of chairman of the Central Military Commission. He is, in fact, the supreme leader of the Chinese people in 39's Liberation Army. Deng Xiaoping is in command of all the country and 39's armed forces. Also established the Central Advisory Committee, a group of veteran officials with experience in policymaking and political operation. Despite its name, this agency was in reality a tool for Deng and his allies to control Chinese politics. Of course, Deng Xiaoping was the first chairman. They are collectively known as the Eight Great Elders. All personnel policies and recommendations must be approved by this committee before de facto leaders can announce and implement them. Even a slight deviation would be enough to make him immediately eliminate the troublemakers. This is exactly what happened to Hu Yaobing later, when he went too far in his reform policies. We in 39 will discuss this. Now, let in Fei 39's redraw the pyramid of Chinese power. After the emperor in Fei 39's death, the key figures occupying the top position at the pinnacle of his power structure are the chairman of the Central Military Commission and the chairman of the Central Stock Exchange Commission. Alongside Deng were 7 allies who formed the 8 Grand Elders. Even within their ranks, they are members of the Politburo Standing Committee. This is the body that should rightfully hold the highest power in Chinese politics, because it leads the Communist Party. We have Hu Yabang, Ye Jianying Zhao, Ziyang Lixianian Chen Yun, and, of course, Deng Xiaoping as a member. They were all close allies of the party, and held important positions within the party and the government. Next, the Standing Committee is the Politburo, comprised of supporters of Deng Xiaoping and 39's reform policies. Among them Chai Zhongshan, 39's father. Essentially, this is the power structure within the Chinese Communist Party under the Xiaoping Party. The Xiaoping Party is not only the architect of modern China, but also the architect of a balance of economic power, where he is the true supreme leader, even if not the top leader in terms of interpretation. Why do we need to know all of this? Because it is closely related to the future of China, future fraught with chaos, protests, and bloodshed. Music. Wang is going to school on his usual bus. Thoughts about his country lingered in his mind. Since the new generation of leaders came to power, China has transformed rapidly. Just last week, he had the opportunity to visit Shenzhen, one of the first major economic zones, established under the direction of the Xiaoping Party. Thanks to its favorable geographical location, Shenzhen attracted a large amount of foreign investment, mainly from Hong Kong. In the early stages, factories began to appear in large numbers. Skyscrapers are springing up like mushrooms. People flocked here in search of a chance to change their lives. Shenzhen has transformed dramatically from a coastal fishing village into a modern and prosperous city. This miracle wasn't in 39 limited to Shenzhen. It also occurred in Ximen, Zhuhai, and Shantou. These cities were designated as testing grounds for the market economy, and, however unbelievable it may seem, it was a resounding success. In 1981, the 4 multi-sector economic zones, China and 39 China's total FDI. Shenzhen alone accounts. 3 years later, they still account for 26% of the country and 39's total FDI. The mega economic zones also witnessed impressive growth rates, with Shenzhen leading the way at 58%. Annually, this figure was nearly 6 times higher than China and 39's average growth rate. At the time for the king, this was indeed a trick. He witnessed thousands of rural people flocking to cities in search of work. Although the major wages at the factories weren't of V39T exactly lucrative, it was still better than selling land for profit. In rural areas, collective farms were also abolished. They were replaced by a system of household responsibility that allowed farmers complete autonomy over their land. They can also retain profits from any surplus crops. This shift spurred farmers on and propelled China and 39's agricultural output to record highs. Between 1978 and 1984, China had changed significantly since his mother and 39's death. Thanks to economic advancements, social welfare has also improved. The emergence of multi-economic zones has raised the issue of establishing new academic disciplines, especially in technology, to align with the development direction set by the leaders. Wang could see that in himself as he was studying high-tech at a university in Beijing. As the bus was about to stop, I heard a familiar voice over the loudspeaker. Our efforts to implement the 4 modernizations will be in vain if rigid thinking is not eliminated and the minds of cadres and the masses are not completely liberated. That was Deng Xiaoping and 39's speech, calling on the Chinese people to liberate their thinking and work together to modernize the country. He has a point. Just thinking about how long we in Faith 39 we remained silent during the Cultural Revolution. Now that FDI is flowing in steadily, living standards are. Perhaps it in 39's time I explored some other ideas, completely new things. The official YouTube Premium upgrade works on up to 10 devices, no background ads, downloadable offline mode, and a host of exclusive features waiting to be discovered. Nello 383 through A487. YouTube Premium elevates your experience. Wang wasn't in 39th the only one who thought that way. Many Chinese people in 39's call for intellectual liberation. Foreign investors not only bring capital but also ideas of freedom and democracy. They are new, they are unfamiliar, and they sound much more interesting than the Communist Party. Meanwhile, the reform process is facing certain challenges. Despite its initial success, China soon fell into recession. In the early 1980s, inflation soared as the state lost control of prices. Income inequality is also increasing. Therefore, even with rising wages, the price of goods remains a significant obstacle in daily life. This is normal for any newly integrated economy, but the Chinese people are still unfamiliar with this phenomenon. In that context, many intellectuals called on students to gather and protest for democratization. Wang had considered participating in such a demonstration tomorrow. There was no violence, however, but he knew it was just the beginning of a dark chapter, a direct consequence of economic reforms and political infighting. Not far from Goang University is Zhongnanhai, the headquarters of the Chinese Communist Party. Their General Secretary Hu Yabang sat in his office reflecting on all the remarkable achievements China had accomplished. As a high-ranking figure in the party, Ho naturally supported the reform and opening up policy, but the extent of reform was the real obstacle between them. Although Deng wanted to develop the economy, he remained determined to maintain the Communist Party and 39's supreme control over all aspects of. Conversely, Ho promoted democracy, openness, and freedom in all its forms. That is why Hu was very lenient with the protests, just as when he refused to punish the three leaders who had started a series of student protests in Anhui province. Conversely, the student body, including Wang, was very supportive of him. Ho also promoted a rejuvenation policy aimed at bringing young leaders into the party and 39's leadership system. All of these things gradually accumulated into a feeling of unease in my heart. He gave Ho this position to carry out the instructions of the 8 elders, not to do whatever he wanted. What would happen if Ho lost control? What would happen if Ho Chimin deposed Bat Lao? Will China suddenly deviate from the path toward socialism? Deng decided that Ho needed to be eliminated. Hu Yabang was summoned by the 8 elders in an informal meeting in Thai. He was forced to resign that day on charges that he had not actively opposed bourgeois liberalization, which he considered merely a euphemism for foreign influence. There was no other. The real power didn't free 39T belonged to him, so he accepted it, and surprisingly, Ho died just 2 years later. This came as a bolt from the blue for students and intellectuals who support institutional change in China, including the Middle East. For them, the dethronement and death of the lake was like a strange bucket of water. They knew the party wasn't in 39 on their side and were willing to do anything to silence their voices, so they decided to go all in or lose everything. 1989. Wang, along with thousands of other students, was marching through Tiananmen Square. This is the first day of the protest. They marched, they cheered, they shouted, they demanded that the communist regime change. Wang felt as if he were being immersed in that atmosphere. Never in his life had he been so enthusiastic. The pressure was so great that the government repeatedly tried to negotiate with the protesters. Wang attended those meetings, but he consistently left disappointed. The protesters and 39 desire for regime change is also aligned with the party and 39's ideology. Both sides are at an impasse. Meanwhile, the king could see extraordinary events unfolding in the square. They erected a statue called the Goddess of Democracy, looking directly at the portrait of Mao. The square was packed with people determined to hold out until the government compromised. Wang was confident that this spirit would soon force the government to speak out. As night fell, Wang hoped that tomorrow would be better, until he heard a deafening sound. Not just one rifle shot, but many. From a distance, Wang could see several tanks. The king and Phi 39's face darkened. The government had resorted to the harshest method, military repression. The entire square was now in chaos. Some fled to save their lives, while others stayed to fight the army. Of course, they didn't, and Phi 39 get a good outcome. Wang quickly blended into the crowd, looking for an opportunity to steal a weapon from a soldier. But the gunfire got louder, and now there were bursts of gunfire. Too, Wang realized this was no longer a protest, it was a matter of survival. Suddenly he saw a small fight breaking out near where he was standing. A student is trying to take a gun from a soldier. They wrestled, punching and kicking each other in the face until, boom, the student fell to the ground motionless. Smoke was coming from the gunner and 39's rifle. The king froze there in Phi 39's. No way an untrained student could defeat a soldier with a gun. He ran away, but the sound of rifle fire grew Unfortunately, a bullet lodged in Wang and 39's chest. He fell to the ground. That was the first time Wang had been shot. It was really painful. The king gradually lost consciousness. Right next to him, people were still running. The sounds of shouting and gunfire created a chaotic atmosphere. Someone is approaching him. He has a Wang Lim left him music. The next day, he woke up in a hospital. His wounds had been treated. The nurse said he was brought here by the military. I just asked the nurse about the protest. In 39's all done. And quat there in Fei 39's no one left in Tiananmen Square Penquat. King understood that the army had completely suppressed the A new state of stability has been established musically, but ironically it has been through violence. The Tiananmen Square protests remain to this day the biggest political upheaval in modern China. The army cleared everything in just one day. Hot to the music from the end of to June 4, 1909. The exact death toll remains a mystery. Meanwhile, the Chinese government claimed to 41 casualties, including soldiers. Other sources estimate the number to be around 1,000 or even up to 2,500 people. The Tiananmen Square protests ended in bloodshed, and immediately following this event, Beijing faced a series of international sanctions, primarily from Europe and the United States, for alleged human rights violations. Music. But all of this could not stop them from continuing on the path of communism.